Thank you. I'd like to say being on a bingo card is probably the highest accolade of my life. It's beautiful. I finally arrived. So, I worked in film for 20 years. I worked on big Hollywood blockbusters, the sort of film that when you come out from, you look at your friend and go, that wasn't very good, was it? And your friend says, but it looked great. And that's what I did. I made big feature films look gorgeous. Big visual effects. I blew shit up for a long time. And I knew that millions of people had seen my work, but I didn't really know what that meant. Because in 20 years in Hollywood films, really, truly millions of people, hundreds of millions of people have seen my work. In fact, if you're over 35 and you grew up in the West, I know you've seen my work. And that is big. But it didn't really mean anything to me. Because when we do work, we can't tell how far it ripples. And I have a tiny Instagram account and a tiny newsletter. And I know in theory, millions of people have seen what I do. But what does it mean? And for me, it came home when, probably about 15 years ago, I was working on a big show. It was 9 months of hell. It got great results. In fact, I won an Emmy for it. But the job itself was day in, day out, awful. It was 7 days a week. It was 18 hours a day. It went on and on and on. But I'm freelance, so I hated it, but I kind of liked the fact it was a lot of work. And when it was finished, they got rid of all of the crew except me, because they wanted someone to do the publicity stuff, and they liked me, and I am very charming. And when it was finished, I handed everything in on a Friday, and I ran away to New York on the weekend. And on the Monday, I met a friend near Times Square. And I came out of the subway, and finally it hit me what millions of people seeing your work means. Because on every one of those buildings was the picture I'd been working on Friday. It was on every bus in New York. It was above every subway station. And that big 3-story thing, that was my stuff. And it did not feel amazing. It felt overwhelming. And I just stood there like a complete tourist. And I could see every problem and every error and all of the spaces where maybe I could have done a bit more. And all that went through my mind was not, I should get a selfie, because this was 20 years ago, we didn't do that. I stood there, and all I thought was, thank God I didn't take long lunches last week. This would be hell. And for all of us, we have way more reach in the real world than we realize. And if you're sitting there thinking, it's not very well for you, Liz, I'm never going to be on a billboard in Times Square, I say it doesn't matter. Because for all of us, everything takes more effect than we realize. And I would never have told this story, even just a couple of years ago, because although I'm Irish, I was raised by the English. And the very worst thing you can do in English society is show off or draw attention to yourself. And quite patently, I am doing both. So I did nothing. I said nothing about this. Outside of the film industry, I still have friends that don't know I've won any of those awards. And that's a shame, because you can tell stories with grace and to bring information into, so that everyone is drawn in to that story. I learned this from my friend Dory Clark, who is a very, very lauded writer. She has 3 New York Times best-selling business books. And this is from maybe a couple of years ago. She probably only had 2 bestsellers at that point. I run a little event called Story Ladder, and I've run it all over the world as a way for people to meet and tell stories and become friends quickly. Dory is there, and as we're doing the introductions, she shows me a masterclass in how to draw people in. Here's what she said. So many of you actually know me, so I don't need to introduce myself. But what you probably don't know about me is this. As well as writing books, I write music. And a couple of years ago, I wrote an off-Broadway show. What? Yes, it was a whole musical. And what you really don't know about me is that tomorrow I fly to Los Angeles because we're up for a Grammy. The whole table lent in. And she said, but it gets better, because even if you don't know that, you certainly don't know this fact about the Grammys. Because it's only the important people who walk the red carpet. You have to be Beyoncé or Madonna, or Beyoncé or Madonna's producer. Ordinary people who are up for a Grammy, people like us, as Dory said, people like us, we don't get to walk this. The show goes out 7:30 to 10:30, and the red carpet is at 6:30. They want all the ordinary people in before then. So she had to be inside at 2:30 in the afternoon, all dressed up for the evening, in evening wear. And of course, the important people start arriving at 6:30 as they walk the carpet. And they don't want you eating on camera, so they feed you at 6:30. But the catering doesn't start till 6:30. So my friend had to take sandwiches to the Grammys. Now, what? We were ecstatic about this piece of information. The whole next day, I was texting her, and I wanted to know what sandwich she was eating. I wanted to know everything about this. I nearly lost my mind with excitement. Because when we draw people in to our stories, we are enthralled. This is what we want as humans. This is what we were born for. You'll have heard people say that we're wired for story. I believe it's more than that. Sitting in the dark, being told stories, is what we have always wanted to do. And the film industry, the industry I worked in for 20 years, specialized in this. A film crew is a mechanism to tell a story. There's a lot of things that we're worried about and that we're concerned with, times and budgets, but it's this moment, the most human thing we can do in a group, to sit quietly and be told a story. In the cinema, as we sit there, we live 1,000 lives. You sit there and you eat your popcorn, and you can fall in love with a beautiful woman. You can be the beautiful woman. You can run from the scary dinosaur. We can live 1,000 lives just sitting there in the dark, and it connects us. And I can tell you a lot of things, but for me, a story can change a lot of stuff. So I can tell you that my friend Tim loves his wife. It's just a fact. But we're wired to remember stories. So I'm going to tell you a tiny story about Tim. So Tim and his wife got married, or his fiancée got married. They had 100 people at the wedding. We're all there in our nice frocks, glass of champagne, beautiful place to have that. And she stood up and did her speech. And it was great. It was witty and warm and full of love. And then Tim stood up. And he said immediately, I'm not going to do a speech, I'm going to sing. This was terrifying to those of us who knew him well, because Tim can't sing at all. In fact, he can't even carry a tune. So we are all looking at each other, somewhat concerned, and he pulls up to the microphone in front of 100 of their friends and sings, "You to me are everything," very, very badly. Really terribly. But he showed that he loves his wife so much that he is willing to make a complete tit of himself in front of 100 of their friends to show how much he cares. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, and not just because of how awful his singing was. And those moments, when I tell that story, your brains light up in the same way as my brain does. I can transmit emotion. Mirror neurons are actually much more than just a science fact. It's a way for us to draw together and to appreciate each other in a different way. And the film industry is a mechanism to tell that story. We have systems in place that can take people from no interest in the story to lining up round the block. For 100 years, this is what we've done. This is what I spent 20 of my adult years considering, always considering that. And most of my business is strategy that helps people use these film techniques in business. Usually what I talk about is things like budgeting and marketing. Marketing becoming more attractive to other people. And I share information like this because there's a lot we can learn from the film industry. For instance, you'll all be aware that film budgets are enormous. So when you hear of a film that is $200 million, that covers the production, pre-production, post-production that I did. What they don't talk about is the $200 million they spend on marketing. And that's how a film can be $250 million at the box office and still be a massive loss because there's $150 million missing. And this marketing isn't just adverts on those big Times Square places. It's the posters in the cinema. It's those horrible little toys and choking hazards at McDonald's, because you can bet McDonald's doesn't pay for those. It's all of those things. And you need to know that for your business, because whatever you do, you need to be spending at least half your time marketing it. It's actually 80% of your time, but I don't want to upset you. And it's not about the money, it's about the effort. When we just talk about the doing, we miss the marketing. And marketing doesn't have to be scary or unpleasant, but it is about selling it and bringing people into your story. In film, we are continually thinking about budget and about time. One of the things you hear most often in the film industry is the old story that if you have enough money, you can buy more time. That's not always true, but you can get more people involved. And when you're trying to rush through a job, eventually someone will say, you know, more people isn't always the answer. 9 women cannot have a baby in 1 month. Some things just take longer. And this is what I normally talk about, how we cram all of this into business and story. Because what we're looking for is to delight our clients, to tell them a story that helps them tell their story, because they are the hero. And when people clamor for you, they clamor for you because of the story, because they remember what you do and how you're positioned. And that's all really important. What I want to talk to you about today is not that. Standing here as a nomad to a room full of nomads, which is very rare, I'd like to talk about a problem that we have in our community that I really believe exists and is not being discussed. It's everywhere, and we are hurt by the fact it's there. Because you see, when people ask us about what we do, how do we describe how strange it is? How do we describe how wonderful it is? When your Auntie Maud calls you and says, "How is Colombia?" How do you describe this? How do you describe the joy of traveling and the awfulness of traveling as well? How do you describe drinking a coffee you don't like because you don't have the language to ask for what you actually want? How do you describe those days that you lock yourself out and there really is no one to help you? or the days that it's wonderful and you have no one to say thank you to, no one to nudge. So instead of talking about the beauty, sometimes we talk about the awfulness. But even then, to someone who doesn't travel, how do you talk about this? What's Colombia like? And what you'll probably find yourself saying is, it was lovely. It rained quite a bit. And that does us both a disservice, you and your auntie, because they don't understand why we do it. Because if you talk about how awful some of it is, they'll tell you to come home. And that doesn't help. And it's not just speaking to people who stay in one place. It's nomad to nomad. If you come up and ask me about Belgium, where I spent 7 months this year, if you come and ask me about it, I can guarantee things I will tell you are, East Flanders has much worse Wi-Fi than you would ever imagine. And 2, they have a lot of laundrettes and no wash and fold. You have to go and spend 2 hours at the laundrette. The fuck? Now that's information. That's helpful, but that is not a story. That does not light up your mirror neurons in joy at what you're hearing. And we need to do that. Because this is what we want. When we don't share our stories, we don't light up. We don't share and enlighten our community. We don't bring ourselves together. And if you're thinking, well, I blog or I write Instagram stories, I'm talking about in person. Because real world stuff is so important. And as nomads, we don't own many things. So the things we do own are locked with stories. Even if they're just as simple as, I got this in Thailand, it's my favorite color. There's stories there. So I would like to share one story with you about a button. Now this button is so precious to me, I actually keep it at home, wherever that is, but I keep it at my sister's in storage. And this button this isn't actually a picture of it, because I don't travel with it. So this button was given to me by my mother when I was 15 years old. I was in the process of preparing her for the fact that I was going to fail my French O-level. My mother was a head teacher. This was quite a big deal. In fact, my mother told me that everything you fail makes you slightly less of a person. Thanks, Mum. So I was easing her into the whole failure of French that was coming. And she wasn't having it. No daughter of hers was going to fail. So she gave me a button. And my face was not impressed. Really? And she told me a story. So that she had been given this button many years before. My mother was one of 4. She was the only girl, and the 3 boys always said she was the brightest. But this is just after the war, and there was no money in the family to send her to university. They could barely send the boys. They all had to get scholarships, and even then, there was the price of bus fare and books. Women didn't go to university. So she stayed home, and my uncles all went away. And their mother, as you can imagine, was quite a traditional woman. She expected my mother to do the cooking and the cleaning, and she kind of picked on her. And my uncle Steve was the buffer between them. And he was going away to his national service. This is after the war, so there was no danger of him getting shot. But all the same, he was leaving, and that was a big deal. And she was very upset because my grandmother was not a nice woman. So there they stand at Lime Street Station in Liverpool, my mother in tears, my uncle in his dress uniform, and he pulled off a button like this, and said, "This is your button." And my mother's face probably entirely mirrored mine 40 years later and went, "Really?" And he said, "No, you don't understand. This button is a lucky button. Nobody in possession of a lucky button has ever had a hard time that they can't deal with. And she put it on a thread, and whenever her mother upset her, she would hold it and think, it's going to be okay. And it was. And she gave it to me, and I put it on a silver chain, and I passed my French O-level. I failed my physics O-level, which wasn't great, but at least it worked so much, so far. And the point is that I've had that button since she gave it to me when I was 15. And somehow I'd never told that story to my sister. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, my sister would find a button in amongst my possessions. And she wouldn't know that story. That memory, that history would be locked away. Because this silly button connects me not just with being 15, connects me to my mother, who has been dead and gone 27 years, and Steve, who's been gone 26, to my grandmother that I never met, but also to all the boys that went away to help fight the war. And I'm a Jew, so all the people who died in the war. And through that, to 35,000 years of Jewish history. And once again, it's a button. So my desire for you, my request for you, is that this weekend you tell a story. You share a story. And if you're too shy to share a story, then at least ask for one. And the simplest way to do that is to just say, what's the story behind that? Because we're nomads, and there is always a story. Thank you.
All right, so you guys might wonder why Liz and I are still standing here on stage together. If you haven't been to 7 and 7 before, there's two things I want you to know. One, we make an amazing cartoon of every single speaker. And by we, I mean the cruising cartoonist, a nomadic artist who lives on a boat with her 2 children and is currently somewhere off the coast of Australia. But she made all of these for each one of our speakers, so you'll get to enjoy them throughout the day. And definitely check her out on Instagram. Secondly, we do Q&As here at 7 and 7. Almost every single speaker has agreed to do a Q&A. So after every single speech, I'll come out here. I will start with the first question to give you time to ponder everything that Liz just told you. Think about what questions you might want to ask. And our dear microphone runners will run around, you raise your hand, and you'll get to ask your question. We usually have time for about 3. So I'm going to start right now with Liz. Do you think that you have to be a naturally good storyteller to connect with people?
Absolutely not. What you need to be is not rambling. Ooh. Keep it short. And obviously it's great if you tell a wonderful story, but you can learn those techniques if you want to. But to be honest, even a short, funny, simple story is important. 2 or 3 lines. I've been sometimes very bewitched by even a story that's just 2 or 3 lines. It's so lovely. So yes, anyone can tell stories.
Yes. Oh, that's so true. Like the challenge to write a story in 5 words.
Exactly.
Or something. Yes. That would be fun. Maybe. I sense a breakout session coming.
I think so.
All right. Do we have questions for Liz? Yes, over here. We've got one. This is Isabel, everyone. Say hi. One of our amazing volunteers.
The burning question, what was on the billboards and what were you staring up at?
See, nothing dates like 3D CG. It was a dreadful Hallmark series special. There was also a series that was really dreadful called Dinotopia.
I love Dinotopia.
There's a series that went on forever, but there was a 3-part thing, and I looked after a city. So you saw it on fire and on flames, and I lived every second of it. But yes, it was very good. And occasionally I see it remaindered in video stores or DVD stores. Like, look at that. No one's ever impressed.
Well, I am.
Thank you.
Another question over here.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I really like that you talked about as nomads, maybe some of us are sharing the crappy parts, or some of us are only sharing the good parts. I wonder if you have an example from your own life of like maybe how you've been able to do both, and especially on social media, because I feel like that's mostly,
Exactly.
sugarcoating.
Yes. If you look at other people's Instagram feeds, they never seem to have bad weather.
Ever.
Does it ever rain?
No, or bad hair days.
Did you? I have those for sure. It's tricky because I find that when I speak to clients one-to-one, I do a lot of video calls with people. When I do that, I often talk about the difficulties of what we're struggling with. On social media, I more talk about the fact that it's not rosy all the time. Because for me, I don't want to really wash my dirty linen in public. But I do make it clear that it's not all blue skies and look at me drinking a juice, because it's a lot more than that. And I also think that for me, and for all of us, this is our lives. This isn't some special short-term thing. I have clients that talk about, I'm going to Paris for a month. And I'm like, whatever. One of my clients tried to say that she couldn't, she hadn't finished a book and she hadn't finished her workshop because she had to emigrate. And I had to stop myself from going, really? Well, that's 3 days out. What's the rest of the time be? Because if you don't do this. So I think it's also compassion for people. But also not having a totally glossy view. 7 and 7 does that well.
Yeah, we try to share like the late nights and stresses, and we've got lots more. We always do a Q&A, so stay tuned tomorrow. There's even more transparency coming at you.
Excellent.
Awesome. I think we have time for one last question.
Thank you.
All right, two more. I see you, Sergio.
So, especially for those of us who've been nomadic or living some sort of alternative life for a long time, we get that same question, how did you start? I swear every podcast that I'm on, it's like, how did you start? How do we keep, I don't want to tell those stories anymore. I'm like bored of telling them. And how do we keep those fresh for people when they ask us those questions that we get every
Over
time?
and over. Well, I think you need a version of an elevator pitch for your business, the same way that people have a short sentence. So it's that way, at least you have an answer. When your mind goes, oh, this again, you can roll something out easily. So I think it's worth developing. I call it an origin story because it makes me feel like a superhero. But I think an answer for that is really helpful because I'm the same. My answer is, I've always done this. And that does not make people happy. They want I couldn't bear it anymore and I left. So I think just have an answer. Cheat. That's my answer. Cheat, my friend.
All right, one final question. Hi.
Hey, Liz.
Hey.
What would be the one best tip you could give somebody to tell better stories?
Well, other than don't ramble and keep it short, well, I think it's important to read the room. So if you're with a bunch of people that are happy and open to go deep, then do that. Because we've all sat in that toe-curling moment where everyone else is light and fluffy, and there's one person goes, so. And they're still like, oh. And one of my storylines, somebody shared a story of such personal trauma that they'd never told anyone, and it sucked all of the oxygen out. Now, there's every reason to tell a story like that. At a social event where people are drinking beer and just want to become friends, not a good moment. So that's it. Read the room, keep it short, and if possible, be funny. But if funny isn't your thing, don't try and be funny. Please, no, funny.
That is great advice. Well, thank you so
you so
much,
much.
Liz. Everyone give Liz Scully a huge round of applause.